This is Transit Unplugged. I'm Paul Comfort. Good to be with you on another edition of the world's leading transit executive podcast, Transit Unplugged, heard now in over 100 countries around the world. On today's episode, our guest is Justin Stuenberg, who is general manager of the Madison Metro Transit System in Madison, Wisconsin, the capital of the state of Wisconsin. This is a large and growing system with about 200 fixed route buses, and they are coming back strong after the pandemic, with ridership now up to 90% of the levels it was back in 2019. And today, Justin takes us on a deep dive into the reasons behind their complete bus network redesign and the impact of it that's been underway for about 9 months. We talk about their new $200 million bus rapid transit program and how they're implementing it, how they're doing electric buses with overhead wires to charge them at the end of the lines, and all kinds of interesting in-depth, plus a look at a degree he got that I was fascinated by, his master's degree, and how that's helped prepare him for the job he has today. All that on this episode of Transit Unplugged. Now join us in conversation with Justin Stuenberg. Justin, great to have you with us today on the Transit Unplugged podcast.
Great to be here. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing with me some of the great stories today. I think we're going to have some great stories about how your system is really coming back strong and proactively planning for the growth of your city. I think that's a great position to be in, man.
Yeah, we're really excited to move transit forward here in Madison, and we've got a lot of things working in our favor.
Absolutely. So Madison, Wisconsin, tell us a little bit about your city and your operation there.
Sure. So we're actually a city department. We're not a regional transit authority. So we're operating under the umbrella of the city of Madison, but we operate regional service. We are the regional service provider in the entire region. So we have contracts with all of our surrounding cities, as well as the University of Wisconsin and other private entities to provide service. So Madison is a unique place, headquarters of some major companies like Epic Systems, as well as the state capital and the home for University of Wisconsin. We're also sandwiched between two lakes. And so we are built on an isthmus, which really constrains our geography, but really makes a very beautiful place to be. And a lot of that works to our advantage from a transit perspective. So we famously have no highways going through the core of our city. And so
that's unusual.
Yes, but it's a really very good market for transit, and it shows up in our ridership. So we're actually one of the highest ridership per capita agencies in the country. I believe we're top 5% in the country in terms of ridership per capita. So
that's great. So tell us about the services that you operate, the types of services, et cetera.
Sure. Right now, we are all local bus and paratransit. We directly operate the fixed route service and contract our paratransit. We are under construction right now for our first bus rapid transit line, and that will be coming online later this year, in fall of 2024. It's a high quality BRT project with about 70% dedicated lanes, and it's about a $200 million project that I think will really take us the next step in terms of providing really quality service through the city.
So you've got 100 and almost 200 buses, right? 240-foot buses. Your ridership is coming back strong from your kind of pre-pandemic levels, right?
Yeah. And so actually we just got our February ridership. We were over 1 million rides for February, again, for the first time since COVID. And so we are now at about 90% ridership recovery since before the pandemic.
And a little bit more about the place of Madison, being that it's a state capital, et cetera. But also I find it interesting that your population is growing, but it's not growing out into the suburbs as much as a lot of other cities might be, maybe because of geography that you mentioned. But instead, the downtown area is growing where people, live within the city limits. You're at 400,000, which is a pretty big these days for a downtown area.
Yeah, you're exactly right. The city has really prioritized growing up, not out. There certainly is some outward growth in some of our suburban neighbors, but they are also focusing on trying to densify and infill too. So it's really a strong market for transit service. We're not trying to chase new developments out into the cornfields. We're really able to leverage our existing service to serve new development coming in. It's been, I think, a huge benefit for us. And I think we are one of the fastest growing regions kind of outside the Sun Belt. But again, what makes us different than, Des Moines, for example, who is also growing pretty dramatically, is that our growth is happening in the downtown core.
Yeah.
And that again, makes a very strong case for transit.
So you've got, in kind of being proactive in planning for the future, You've got a bunch of major projects coming up. You mentioned the BRT. We're going to talk about your complete bus network design in just a minute, your new facilities, new technology. Justin, I got a question for you. Where are you getting all the funds for this?
Well, we've been very fortunate to have a strong partnership with the FTA and been successful in a lot of our grant opportunities. And we've got very strong support locally. Again, with our ridership being very high, it's a high priority for our city government and for our surrounding cities. And so they've been willing to contribute funds to make these projects happen. But again, usually only 20% because we've been able to successfully create projects that are very appealing to federal funding opportunities and meet a lot of the scoring criteria very well. So,
and how are you funded for operating dollars, not capital? Do you have a dedicated tax? Is it just an annual allocation from the city council or?
Yeah. So, that's another part that is challenging. Again, we are a city government with no dedicated tax operating regional service. And so right now it is just a direct appropriation from each individual partner city to fund our budget. It can fluctuate from year to year. And there really is no dedicated pool for growing. And so that makes it very difficult, especially in a growing region. We really have to manage those relationships and those forecasts and try to be creative in the way that we are growing so that we can continue to put each city in a position for success. Ultimately, that means that I report to 6 different city councils, which is sometimes challenging, often challenging. But it's the hand we've been dealt here, and we're trying to be successful and move forward.
And operationally, who do you report to day to day?
The city of Madison mayor, and then we have a transportation commission that handles the function of the city council.
All right. So let's jump into your projects you've got coming up. First off, back in 2017, when I was in Baltimore, I left just before the implementation of it, but we did a total bus network redesign based on Tom Lambert's Houston model, where basically we analyzed where people wanted to go today, because in 2017, it was different than it was 50 years before. And unfortunately, our route system was laid out 50 years before, like a lot of cities were, they kind of followed the old streetcars where 2/3 of the route went to the central business district. And that wasn't the need of passengers anymore. And no one had ever kind of ripped the Band-Aid off and said, all right, we gotta totally rehab this thing and take people where they want to go today. Is that kind of what you did post-COVID? You decided, look, we have new travel patterns, hybrid work schedules, 3-day city, all that stuff?
Yeah. So we implemented our redesign last summer of 23. And there was a need for it even before COVID.
Yes.
We had it had been kind of on the books from a planning standpoint before that, but COVID is what really allowed us to move it forward more quickly. Madison was a little bit different than I think most cities in terms of we had actually done a major service redesign in the mid 90s.
Okay.
And so we weren't kind of dealing with
that is different.
The true legacy, the streetcar lines just turned into bus routes and that's the way it's always been. We, in the 90s, implemented like a transfer point system. So basically, there were 4 transfer points were created in what was at the time roughly the periphery of the city. And there were routes that went between the transfer points, and then there were routes that kind of did one-way loops through neighborhoods away from the transit point or transfer points to create that connectivity. That was starting to falter for 2 major reasons. One is our city was growing so much that, at the time they were built, they were nearly at the periphery. Well, since then, a huge amount of city has been developed outside of them, which basically means that everyone outside of them had to go through unnecessary transfers and out of direction travel to get to where they wanted to be. We actually found that people at the periphery of the city had transferred at 3 times the rate of people elsewhere in the city. And it just so happens that in Madison, much of our low income community and people of color have been pushed to the outskirts of the city. And so they were being disproportionately impacted by that system. And then the other element was by having transfer points at both ends of the kind of downtown bisecting routes, we had time transfers at both ends of routes, which operationally we just couldn't sustain as, the city grew up and traffic got worse. Those routes were more and more delayed. And ultimately what was designed to have a bus arrive every 30 minutes and everyone make a transfer and go along their way meant that buses were often 6 or 7 minutes late. And then everyone missed their transfer and we're sitting around for 30 minutes. And so
that's no good.
So So those two things were what really drove the change. And then COVID was the opportunity to get it done.
So what's the new design?
So it's a bit more, so I know Houston and most cities have tried to go more towards the grid model where we're focusing on transfers with high frequency grid routes. With our geography, we just can't do that. There is no grid.
Okay.
And so we had to go kind of a more robust radial type system. But again, trying to improve frequency of headways as much as possible, make the routes go in straight lines as much as possible and enable those transfers where the opportunities were given, but not basing our entire network off people making transfers.
Really good kind of self-awareness of your geography and your system, proof of the old adage that if you've seen one transit system, you've seen one transit system because everyone
absolutely.
is different. Now tell us the results. I think you've had some fantastic results as it relates to ridership and reduced transfers, spreading the load, not to crush load. Go through all that with us.
We implemented June of 2023. So we're about 9 months in or so. And so far we've most months seen at least a 15% jump since then. So I think
in ridership.
In ridership. And so still fairly early, but all signs are pointing in the right direction.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think one of the things that's especially unique about it is that we've seen a big drop in transfer activity. So while unlinked trips are down or are up 15%, we've actually seen like paid boardings go up almost 30%. And so again, it's very difficult for us to parse the data out, but we feel that the actual increase in the number of people using our system, not just number of unlinked boardings, is more in the range of 30%. So yeah, a huge benefit, huge increase.
Yeah. And the service has kind of been spread out. You don't have those heavy peaks where there's no room for anybody on the bus and people are left standing.
Yeah. So our old system was very much designed around the 9 to 5 commuter. And so we have spread that out a little bit to reflect, again, some of the changes in COVID in terms of work from home, as well as, more 24-hour shifts that service workers and others are doing. And so we have spread that peak across the day a bit more. So we've seen ridership in the midday and weekends significantly past higher than our pre-COVID numbers, but the peaks still are a little bit lower. One of the things that I think is, as you kind of alluded to, is that our ridership is so strong that we often have issues with capacity and overloads and pass-bys. And those are challenges that we're continuing to mitigate. It's not one that the redesign solved, but it's helped. And our bus rapid transit will help even more as we implement 60-foot buses. So.
Let's talk about that. What convinced you that you needed a BRT? It seems like the last 6 interviews I've done with CEOs, they're all talking about their BRT. Some of them have one route, like our latest 2 television shows in Tulsa and in Kansas City. They're both all about the next BRT line. What convinced you needed to get into that world of bus rapid transit?
I think our high ridership demand and our very linear nature of the city just make us a perfect candidate for that. And I think it shows in some of the scoring criteria of our grant applications, but we are very much arranged in a straight line. And so our BRT it'll kind of almost be 3 routes overlapping on each other, and we'll actually have 5-minute headways in the core of the city.
Wow.
And
5 minutes, that's good.
With 60-foot buses. So it will really provide that spine of capacity that we desperately need, because right now we're just throwing extra buses out there on a regular basis just to absorb the demand. And it's a challenge operationally, and it's not intuitive or useful for passengers other than just being able to get the bus. So,
and because you're a city department, you've been able to get 70%, did you mention? Dedicated lanes, center platform stations, level boarding, TSP, the whole cornucopia of prizes that are coming your way to do a real BRT, man.
Yep. And I do think it's going to be a national model. And that's one place where being a city department has made things easier.
Yes.
In most situations, it's made it more difficult, but in that particular case, it's actually been a lot easier to implement as a city department.
So a little bit more about it. Did I understand you're doing electric buses with overhead charging en route? Tell me about that.
We'll actually be, again, we've kind of structured it as 3 separate lines all overlapping with each other. And because of the length of those lines, because we're a radial type network, the system, it's about 16 miles long and in the main section of line. But we're actually buying 46 of these 60-foot electric buses as part of the project. And they will be charged at the layover points at the end of the line, where we're actually building park and rides and off-street facilities where it will have overhead pantograph chargers and restroom facility for drivers and just be an overall quality place to wait off street. So
yeah,
we've built in a lot of duplication and redundancy in that charging system. So for example, we have 2 chargers at each end of the line, whereas in reality, we really only probably needed 1 charger at one end. But again, we wanted to build in a lot of that redundancy just in case there was an issue with the charger, with the power grid, with anything else. We're actually on 4 chargers on 3 different power utility companies. So we built in a lot of protections there.
Yeah, that's interesting, Justin. And when do you anticipate, what's the timeline for the BRT?
So we're under construction now. We expect construction to wrap this summer, and then we go into operation this fall.
Wow, so, that's awesome.
Exact timeline is still TBD.
Yeah.
We're waiting for.
Well, let me know. We'd love to get up there and film that and all that stuff, maybe for a future show on the TV show. That'd be awesome.
Yep.
One other interesting tidbit about this that I wanted you to share was what your payment options are going to be for fare collection.
So I know most BRT lines use a proof of payment system with fare inspection, kind of no barrier boarding. Our system was being designed in 2020, 2021. There was a lot of concern around profiling, especially racial profiling of the fare inspectors, which I know has been at least a concern, if not a reality in other cities. And we also have a bit of a unique arrangement with the University of Wisconsin where they pay for their students and staff on a per ride basis rather than just kind of a flat lump sum. And so we knew that we needed to accurately track each of those individual boardings because typically somebody with an unlimited ride monthly pass, they don't tap their card at a station for proof of payment. Those two things kind of coming together, we ultimately decided to go with not doing proof of payment. Instead, you will tap your card to board as you board the bus, but we will have all door boarding. And so there will be a fare validator at each of the doors. So 60-foot bus is 3 doors and people will be able to board any door, tap their card as they board. And we've actually kind of built into the system camera views for the bus operator so that they have a very clear view in their dashboard of the boarding activity at the middle and rear door. And so that they have some ability to monitor that. Ultimately, we won't tell them to stop the bus and make somebody pay. We will, ask them to remind people, but ultimately it will be the driver that will be enforcing things.
Gotcha. So do you have a police force or do you have an agreement with your local police force to monitor for safety and security?
We do not have our own police force. We do have a contract with the city police department to provide, whatever services we might need. And again, that's another place where being a part of the city is helpful as we can share camera footage fairly easily with them. And fortunately, we haven't had to use that a whole lot. That's been helpful, but yes, we don't have our own.
Let's quickly go through a couple other items in our remaining time. I'd wanted you to walk us through your plans for new facilities and new technology.
Yeah, we are currently a 1 facility operation. We're in a building that was built for 160 buses. And as I mentioned, we have about 200. And so we've outgrown our space and we have outgrown it for a long time. And so we're in the process. We've purchased a new facility and we're in the process of renovating that. That will become online this summer as well. And so we'll go to a 2 facility operation at that point. And then that will give us the opportunity to grow as well as we continue to grow the system. We needed that space. And so that's important. But our main facility was built in the early 80s and basically untouched until about 3 or 4 years ago. And so we are in the process of renovating that to bring it to more modern standards as well. So we've completed three phases and our 4th phase and final is planned for next year. So excited to bring that to fruition.
Yeah. Do you have the BRT buses already or are they coming in over the summer or what's the game plan?
They're coming in. We have, I believe, at last check, about 20 of them in-house, but they're coming in 3 a week roughly.
So you're really setting yourself up, I think, for a successful future, Justin. But I want to, in our remaining few moments, I want to jump to your past because I found your career path very interesting and particularly the master's degree you got. A lot of times people in this industry fall into it. They don't plan for it, but you had a very interesting career path and you got an interesting master's degree. I was wondering if you could tell us some about that.
Sure. So yeah, my undergrad was actually in mechanical engineering. and I did not go into transit immediately. So I grew up in a small farm community, had never ridden a bus until I went to college. And I got there and was in Champaign-Urbana and was riding on buses for the first time. They were 20 years old and they had holes in them. And we were all crammed in there like sardines. And whereas most people would have thought it was terrible, I was amazed at the efficiency of it all and how to move that many people that efficiently. And so I kind of fell in love with it at that point. But I continued my career and got my degree and started working in the aircraft industry. And I was ultimately designing aircraft engines for Rolls-Royce, but decided that that wasn't the path I wanted to go. And transit had already been in the back of my mind for a while. And so I decided to pursue a master's degree in transportation systems analysis, basically a hybrid of transportation engineering and planning. And, it's still not a transit specific degree, but it's about as close as you can get. And so it really, I think, positioned me well for success. And then I undertook the challenge of basically starting over in a new career field and was fortunate to land a role and have moved my way up since then.
And you took that degree at the University of South Florida, Qatar, right? The Center for Urban Transportation Research.
Yep, that's right.
That's a great school. I have friends that work there. It's a really good background for exactly what you just did. Reboot your whole system and plan for the future.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think having those fundamentals, that background is very useful. Justin, we wish you the very best as you continue to grow your system to meet the challenges of the future and really modernize it. Any last words you'd like to share?
No, I want to say thank you again. And thanks for giving me the opportunity to highlight Madison. And I look forward to talking with you more as we continue to roll out these major projects.
Thank you.
This is Tris Hussey, editor of the Transit Unplugged podcast. Thanks for listening to this week's episode with our special guest, Justin Stuenberg of Madison Metro Transit. Now, coming up next week, it's a pretty special episode. It's episode 300. Yes, we've had 300 episodes over now our 7 seasons of Transit Unplugged. And to celebrate, we have a special CEO Roundtable recorded at ThinkTransit in Tucson, Arizona. This is a really great interview where you get some inside perspectives on what it's like to be a transit CEO. Speaking of sharing perspectives, do you know someone who might like Transit Unplugged? Share it with them, and they can get all the career advice and insight into transit that you get every week. Transit Unplugged is brought to you by Modaxo. At Modaxo, we're passionate about moving the world's people, and at Transit Unplugged, we're passionate about telling those stories. So until next week and episode 300, ride safe and ride happy.